Welcome back in, Daily Destroyer, the DFS show on the Dynasty Warzone Network. As always, I'm your host, Tyler, with my co-host, Lou. Ready to bring you some great information here for Week 8. Before we jump in, wanted to recap how Week 7 went for us. Not the hot streak has ended for me. It was a bad Week 6, and Week 7 wasn't much better. Won 38% of my head-to-heads. Don't love to see it, but also better than the last week. Where I fell apart a bit was I played Chuba. Didn't love to see that with not even 10 points. Fell for that Ridley chalk. 12 points, not very good. And then I also, like a fish, played Mooney, tried to believe in the Bears in the pass against the Bucks, but the Bears are truly that bad. So between Mooney, Ridley, and Chuba, that's what really killed me last week. Still made some money back, but it was not a profitable week for me. Lou, how did Week 7 go for you?
Yeah, not enough focus on trying to get Cup, and more kind of like what you said. I was stuck on playing Ridley with that value and didn't allow me to move pieces to get up to Cup, and that's really what determined the week. So it wasn't the best week. I had some GPP teams that did all right, Brady stacks, and overall wasn't the best, but we'll get back at it this week.
That's what we're doing, man. That's what we're doing. Let's start it off like we always do. Quarterbacks, man. The first guy that's going to stick out, I think it's going to be pretty obvious. It's a pretty safe cash play at this point in time. It's going to be Jalen Hurts against the Lions. We know the Lions defense isn't as god-awful as they have been, but they're still bottom 10 defense, pretty easy to attack. And then you look at Jalen Hurts, 72, pretty solid price, especially with some of these like Dak Prescott's and Lamar Jackson's off of the slate. I mean, the dude has gotten at least 21 DK points every single week this year. You can feel pretty safe in your lineup getting you in that 20 to 25 range. And when he's playing a defense like the Lions, it feels even better. I know there's some like stuff going on in real football, talks of Hurts getting pulled possibly. I'm not really sure how much truth there is to that, but regardless, he's playing against the Lions. And the points come in the fourth quarter, but the points are counted the same no matter when they are scored. So 7,200 playing Hurts in cash seems like a lock. Lou, any thoughts to add?
Yeah, the idea of him getting pulled, I think, that's really the only risk playing him this week. But the idea is like you're playing the Lions, so are they really going to pull you mid game in the Lions? Because it's kind of tough. I think if you're losing to the Lions, it's more likely that you can come back. And if you're going to throw in a backup quarterback at that point mid game, like you said, I think it might be more realistic that he would start next week if they lost to the Lions versus them trying to come back. And as we've seen with Hurts, a lot of his garbage time points have been what we've been chasing, and he backdoors into 20 fantasy points pretty much each week. So that's why he's a pretty solid cash play, I think, because facing the Lions, likelihood of getting touchdowns, Miles Sanders is out, so he might end up running the ball a little more than normal, even though he already runs the ball plenty. So yeah, Hurts is likely a lock for me into cash.
And if you want to go a little bit cheaper, another guy that I'm interested in and I think is an okay cash play is going to be Matt Ryan at 5,900. Things have looked a little bit better for the Atlanta Falcons here. Not that their team is much better, but in terms of scoring fantasy points, things have worked out a little bit better. In 3 of the 5 weeks, he's cleared 300 yards. In the last 5 weeks straight, he's had at least 2 passing touchdowns. In this matchup here against Carolina Panthers, who have been pretty bad at creating any pressure, should give Matt Ryan plenty of time to operate with Ridley and Pitts out there. There are some weapons, and Cordell Patterson, like there's some positive pieces there on that offense. So it's not a surprise we've seen him actually put up some solid numbers over the past few weeks. He over the last 4 of the last 5 weeks, he's had at least 22 points on DraftKings, which is still pretty solid. So 5,900, he's definitely a thought in playing if I need to save some cash. Thoughts on Ryan?
Yeah, I think Ryan's all right. He's kind of been more like the Ryan of old, where now he's throwing the ball 40 times a game the last few weeks, and
4 of the last 5 weeks, 40 attempts. Yep.
Yeah, in 5 straight games, he has at least 2 touchdowns. So the floor seems like pretty decent for Ryan. It's not a crazy matchup. They're playing at home, as we know. Like historically, Matt Ryan is pretty comfortable at home indoors, and I like that call as well. Maybe more so in tournaments. Another cheap guy I have some interest in. So it's in this week specifically. There's like a huge drop off. There's the guys above 7K, and then Tannehill, and then everyone's under 6K. So it's like a weird drop off in price, which I think makes tournament builds a lot more fun this week. I like Tua 5,500. The issue in this
tough
is
matchup, man.
yeah, Bills are favored by 14, but the last 2 games Tua has thrown the ball over 40 times each game. We saw last week he had that upside. He had 4 touchdowns. He's been throwing a few picks. Like every game this year that he's started and played a full game, he's thrown at least 1 interception. But he has somewhat of a rushing floor that Ryan doesn't have. He became pretty popular towards the end of the last week and was in a lot of high-scoring GPP lineups, but the price hasn't really adjusted up for that. So he's still pretty underpriced, I think, 5,500. So what are your thoughts on Tua? Like, I know it's not a great matchup, but they're going to have to throw the ball. He's going to have to try to make stuff work. He's had a couple straight games with pretty high completion percentage too. So he's throwing the ball more often and seems to be more comfortable right now than we saw last year.
I'm probably not playing Tua. Probably not even playing with tournaments, to be honest. I am of the belief that the Bills defense is just that elite. I mean, they're top 3 DVOA in run and pass defense. I mean, they have been absolutely ripping. Like we always talk about the offense and Josh Allen and everything, but I think somewhat overlooked at times is how good the Bills defense is playing. And I just don't really trust the Dolphins offense as much. Like, don't really trust Gaskin when we get to that. Like Parker, who knows if he's going to play or not. Waddle's fine. Gesicki's fine. Like I'm tempering all expectations for all Dolphins this week, and like he's a season long. So I would say in DraftKings, regardless of what I'm playing, it's not somewhere that I would be looking. I mean, I would just go up to Matt Ryan for 4K, 400 more.
But I guess that's my idea. Maybe it's more of like a big field play, but the volume per dollar, I guess, is what interests me because
Gotcha.
I think he's likely going to throw the ball 40 times again in this game. And he has some rushing upside to maybe rushing a touchdown. And it seems like for him to make value in this spot is higher chance than a Darnold who could easily get pulled again, or Baker, Lawrence, like the other guys in that range. I would prefer playing Tua, but he's not necessarily a cash play for me because of that matchup, and he could easily come out of this game just completely shut down.
Last guy I want to talk about is Josh Allen, 8,100, highest quarterback on the slates. He started the season slow. Things weren't great, but now he's 8,100, the most he's been all year. And we've seen him clear 32 DK points in 3 of the last 4 games. And it's the other side of the ball. The Miami defense has not been great. So are you interested in or thinking of paying that extra 900 to go from Hurts to Josh Allen? Thoughts on Allen?
Yeah, I think that salary is a little tight this week as of now. We'll come to it in some of the other positions, but if some other stuff opens up and we get like 4K running backs or 3K wide receivers or something, then I would have some interest going to Allen just because I feel more comfortable playing Allen than Hurts.
Yes.
But that 900 in salary,
we're gonna need it. We're gonna need it.
I probably will. But I'd have interest in. I think one of the common stacks in GPPs this week are going to have something like Allen, Diggs, and then bring it back with Waddle or Gesicki maybe. But I like Allen just in general, but I don't know if I'll be able to get up there.
Any other quarterbacks you'd like to talk about before we shift to running backs? Got another one. Hit me with it.
We have Jameis Winston. He's coming back to New Orleans this week, and we got a little over game.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
In New Orleans, he's coming back to face the Bucs this week in New Orleans, and he's 6K. Honestly, like he hasn't done anything super special this year, but I mean, man.
The matchup's good, and the matchup's great because it's the Bucs. You don't run on the Bucs. No one can run on the Bucs, so you just pass the ball the whole time. I mean, like, we saw the Bucs shut down the Bears, but like, honestly, at this point in time, I have no faith in the Bears. And while I don't have a lot of faith in the Saints, like, There's the revenge game narrative that gets us, and the matchup is good. So I don't hate it, Lou.
What about? And I mean, we won't exactly talk about this later, but like, what about opposite revenge game and use? What are the odds on Tampa Bay pick 6? You know, like that'd be something interesting. Because what if in the opposite side where it's like, well, they know exactly what Jameis Winston does. They've played him so often, and they know how to expose him. And maybe he just throws 4 picks in this game, and it's like opposite revenge. So that's the other side of it. But I figured I'd throw it out there. The problem with Winston is it's like who do you match him up with? Like Callaway. Callaway's kind of cheap, but I mean, I don't know. Winston this season hasn't been the same as Winston in when he was a Buck.
If you play Winston, I'm playing him naked is very fair. I mean, maybe with Kamara, but it's
you play him with the Bucks defense. You double dip.
Jesus Christ. All right, man. Pool of 3 quarterbacks. Who are the 3 quarterbacks you're most interested in going into Week 8?
Yeah, I'll have Hurts, Ryan, and Allen. But I think someone like Herbert or Stafford are also interesting in tournaments because. I mean,
we know what they can do. We know they're ceiling.
And I mean, we'll probably talk about it at running back. But if Eckler is hurt and out of this game, then they might lean a little more on Herbert anyway. So Herbert's probably the other one who I'm going to try to make a lineup with. But I've been playing Brady the last few weeks, and I mean, man, this guy doesn't age, huh? He's still just putting up stats.
Yeah, I mean it's tough one, man. Anyways, you got your pool 3 quarterbacks.
Yep.
Hurts, Ryan, Allen.
Hurts, Allen.
Going to running backs here, man. The first one, got to talk about it. For me, at least one of the ones I'm building my lineup around is going to be Daryl Henderson. Disappointed last week. We saw his salary rise to 66, the highest it's been all year against the soft Lions, but maybe the Lions aren't so soft. And he disappointed a lot of folks with 9.4 DK points in week 7. But prior to that, he had at least 15 DK points for the last 6 weeks. Well, I guess, 5 games because he's out a bit there. But you know what I'm saying. So he's been on a tear, 6,500. He is a true bell cow on this Rams offense who's absolutely cooking right now. And they're playing the Houston Texans. I mean, we're looking at them being they're like a 15-point, 16-point favorite in this game. Pretty insane from the Rams side. So, like, I am okay going right back to Daryl Henderson at 65, drops $100 from last week. I can easily just write off last week like it didn't happen. Yes, it hurt me playing Henderson last week, but I'm going to let that one go just because I know how good this defense is and how cheap Daryl Henderson is with how many touches he does get. Daryl Henderson seems just like a stone lock at this point.
Yeah, and I think it'd be a little different conversation if he scored a touchdown last week and now it's like
15 points again. Exactly.
It's funny that was his lowest scoring week of the season, but I mean, he still had 15 carries and 6 targets. So the numbers are there. He's got another great matchup, and I plan on playing him again.
Okay. So once you lock Henderson into your cash lineups here, Lou, what's the next running back that you're most interested in tossing in there?
Mixon, 6,900. This seems like the type of spot. I know it's weird. He hasn't had 20 carries since week 2, but I think he's fully healthy again.
Yeah, it's hurt, man. It's pretty easy to explain.
I mean, he's had a touchdown in 4 straight games. He's facing the Jets, who just got completely run over last week by the Patriots. It doesn't matter which running back they had out there. And the guys behind Mixon are still just an afterthought. Chris Evans, who was taking some of that work off, he's already been rolled out for this game. And so, I mean, maybe P. Ryan has a few touches here and there, but when it comes down to it, like, Mixon's their guy, and in a matchup against the Jets, like, the likelihood of him getting 20 touches is pretty high in this game.
Yep, and, could be a Mixon week.
I think it's a pretty good Mixon week.
Could be a good Mixon week. I will say I'm not like I like Mixon his play. He could find his way. Would likely have been my pool if I would be sitting here giving out pools, but there is some concern with P. Ryan, in my opinion. Like, they were blowing out the Bengals last week, and they just took Mixon out of the game. Like, they just straight up took him out of the game and said, P. Ryan, you're going there. We saw, 11 carries for him. So if this game gets out of hand, which it easily could, as the Jets are down Corey Davis, they're down. I know Zach Wilson has been good, but they're down Zach Wilson. Like, the offense, I think their implied total is
shambles.
Yeah, the Jets' implied total is 16 points this week. Like, so like if there's a world where the Bengals are up 2 or 3 scores going in the third or fourth quarter, like Mixon could just straight up sit. And that is what worries me about playing Mixon at 6,900, because I personally, if in that like same range of running backs, I would probably lean Swift at $200 more.
Yeah, I get that. I think that's the big point, right? Is they kind of did this last week where they were up big and they eased off of Mixon towards the end of the game because of his injury history, even this year, like recent injury history. And I mean, Bengals right now, like compared to last year, Bengals right now look like they could make the playoffs,
win the division. They look like they could legitimately win the division.
Winners. Yeah. Like, I mean, I still probably lean Browns in that. I kind of depends on the whole like Chubb and Hunt thing with them, but yeah, I mean the Bengals are. This is maybe the first time in Mixon's career that they don't have to run him to the ground, and they don't have to. They could ease into him, especially if they're up big. So that's out of it with 6,900, and like I said, the salary is pretty tight this year or this week. So I'm not overly trying to shove Mixon onto lineups. So he's definitely behind Henderson for me, and still trying to decide between him and Swift because, like you said, I mean, Swift has been the guy, but what concerns me is it shouldn't be a concern, but I just kind of think that the Lions are going to win this game, and in that sense, like maybe Swift isn't going to get 5 catches. I mean, he's on pace for 100 catches this year, and he has had at least 5 targets in every game, and so that side of it is like it's hard to deny he has a great floor. So I mean, I probably will end up leaning Swift over Mixon for that $200, and even in that sense, it's like, well, if my concern on price is there, then I would probably drop lower. The issue I have is like every running back under 6K is kind of meh.
It's pretty garbage, man. It's pretty garbage.
So you're saying earlier about Damian Harris, you like?
Yeah, I mean, yeah, I can take that just real quick here because I think that, in my opinion, in that pretty much at the same range is people will probably go back to Chuba. I expect Chuba's, I wouldn't be surprised if he has like some like 15, 18% ownership, maybe 20 and some cash. But he still is that guy, and I think people are going to look at that Atlanta matchup and be like, let's throw Chuba back in there. And I get it, and I think he's a fine play. But I look at Damian Harris, and I think there's a couple key pieces that I am really, I think he's a good play even in cash this week. Taking a look at the Chargers. So the Chargers have been an absolute run funnel for the majority of this year. I mean, think about the Bucs being a pass funnel. It's like the opposite of that. Chargers have been quite elite against the pass. Their 5th DVOA, their pass defense, but their run defense is dead last. So 32nd DVOA run defense and 32nd in yards allowed per carry. I mean, the Chargers run defense is abysmal. Right. So, there is some concern, like, if the Pats go down a bit, that, they're going to give the ball to whoever, that guy is that week, Bolden or JJ Taylor or whatnot. But, Vegas seems to think this game's going to be pretty close. I mean, the Pats are only 5-point dogs, away dogs. So, like, at the end of the day, like, if you factor in the fact that they're away dogs at 5 points, like, they expect this to be easily a 1-score game. So if this game's close, Damian Harris should feast against this terrible Chargers run defense. I mean, he's been on a tear lately. Over the last 2 weeks, he's had 32 rushes, 207 rush yards, and 3 touchdowns. So I think there's a room here, and I know it's a bit of a risk because he doesn't get work in the pass game. But at the same time, like just the way he's been playing, the way that the Patriots have been feeding him the ball, and how bad the Chargers run defense is, that I would prefer to play Damian Harris for $100 more than Chuba this week.
Yeah, and I have somewhat of an interesting Damian Harris take where you'd think, based on like what you said, that he'd be decent cash, but I think he's better tournaments because it's the type of thing where you're playing him to get 100 yards and a touchdown, or maybe multiple touchdowns. I'm not overly concerned with what happened last week because they were just so far ahead they didn't really need him, and they were putting in Bolden or JJ Taylor and kind of just Belichick playing with them. But I think for Harris, because of his floor being that much lower, like he comes out of this game with 6 points, I wouldn't be surprised. That's where I kind of prefer him in GPPs in that way, because you're leveraging him off of these other guys who say like maybe not Chuba, but say like Fournette for a couple hundred more. Like you're playing him to not play them who might get like hyped up more, and people don't like to play Damian in GPPs because he doesn't really have the passing game upside. So I like the call. I think I think I do prefer him over Fournette this week. It's kind of tough because Fournette has just been getting
Saints run
plenty
defense
of
is
touch.
good though, man. Saints run defense is just good, and I feel like that brings us to maybe talk about Brady. I mean, like I just think they're gonna torch him through the air, man.
Yeah, and so I kind of like that call. One thing I brought up to you earlier that could come up this week is if Austin Eckler were to be out, if Alex Collins were to be out, Miles Sanders is out. Like, are we looking at some of these backup running backs in the sub 5K range? I'm guessing if Eckler's out, that Roundtree will get the bulk of the carries. Jackson's probably more likely to be in the pass game, but it seems like they've been off of Kelly for the most part.
Mm-hmm.
But I mean, Roundtree at 4,400 against the Patriots, like, it doesn't sound terrible. And then if Collins were to be out, then I don't know. It doesn't seem like Penny is like much yet, but like,
not doing it.
I mean, DJ Dallas, Homer, and Penny, like maybe Homer, but that
It's
one would be
there.
interesting.
I think we're talking sub 5 here. Michael Carter's the guy that I feel most comfortable playing. Tevin Coleman is out once again. It's just him and Ty Johnson. I believe Michael Carter is a much better back than Ty Johnson. He's seen at least 13. He's seen at least 10 carries in the last 3 games, and we saw his targets blow up last week. I mean, 9 targets for 8 catches. Don't expect that every single week, but now with Tevin Coleman out of the picture, Corey Davis is now out and playing with Mike White. I know there's that narrative. I don't have much to back it up, but getting the ball out quick, it leads me to another game where we see Michael Carter get 10, 12 carries on the ground, maybe not for much, but 6 or 7 targets through the air for 5 or 6 catches at 4,900. I feel like the floor is pretty decent. I mean, he's cleared 10 DraftKings points for the last 5 games, so there's something, he's 2x his salaries at the very least over the last 5 games. So I look at when we talk about like, injury, who we thinking about playing, like, Tevin Coleman's out. So like, if we're talking about like that kind of situation, I would rather play Carter than any of those Chargers or Seattle guys.
Yeah. And it definitely makes sense because and with Corey Davis out, the likelihood that Carter, we already know he has a role that they're carving out, and it seems like they're trying to really force we drafted this guy, let's see what he's got. And I like Carter. I played him on a couple teams last week, but unfortunately paired them with the Jets, who had negative points. But I mean, if you even looking at his game log, like, he's getting double-digit points in most of these games, and I mean, he's got 3 straight games with double-digit fantasy points, and he hasn't even hit 40 rushing yards yet. That doesn't tell you that he probably has a pretty decent floor, and his upside, we haven't even seen it yet. So say this guy ends up getting 18 carries for 80 yards, then I mean, he's probably getting 20 points in this game. So 4,900, like, that's pretty solid play. And people might get that fancy, oh, these guys are out, let me play him. And so would you prefer similar price range Michael Carter to say Alex Collins, who's 5,300?
Yeah, just because Alex Collins is not getting much pass work and he's a little dinged up, like, I feel better about Alex. It's nice. Collins is probably gonna get 15 carries if he plays, and the matchup is pretty soft, but they're cycling backs in and out there. I mean, we saw Penny get 7-9 or somewhere around their touches last week. Like, DJ Dallas wasn't a thing, but Homer still. Like, I don't want to play the guessing game here with the Seattle backfield. I mean, it's just really not worth it. And I'll take the back around the same price that I feel better about the passing floor, just because those catches are worth so much more on DraftKings,
Yeah, and I think the others in that range that people might talk up is Gainwell, Boston Scott. But I mean, like I said, like Carter, we know what we're getting from Carter, and all of these other situations seems like they'll get split more than the Carter role.
Yeah, I mean, and my hot take on that is I think Boston Scott outscores Gainwell this week in terms of fantasy points. I think
Yeah,
he's the
which I
guy
don't think
that
is
they're
like
going
overly hot of a take,
to. No, it's
but
not. But there's people that love Gainwell out there, I guess.
people are all about Gainwell. But yeah, it seems like what do you say? Boston Scott was the guy in the red zone last week. So
3 green zone touches last week. I mean, it was
that
good to
really
see.
limits Gainwell because you're playing Gainwell hoping that he gets like a touchdown. I think
'Cause-
I saw a tweet that they're saying think of Gainwell like Chase Edmonds, where he might get 5 to 7 catches in this game, but the likelihood of him getting a touchdown is relatively low unless he gets a touchdown from like
So
20 plus yards.
and I think the way that I look at this, Lou, is I think Gainwell's role doesn't change, and I think Boston Scott is Miles Sanders' direct backup. That's like the way that I'm sort of looking at this is like, maybe he's a little bit of an uptick, but like I think Gainwell's role is pretty cemented in what it is, and I don't expect to see a ton of increased usage out of Gainwell, but I expect Boston Scott to kind of come in and take over that Miles Sanders role. Probably not in terms of snaps, because there were some weeks there where we saw Miles Sanders like a clear 70% of the snaps. Like, I don't think it's going to happen. I think we're looking at more of like a 50-50, 60-40 split. But, I view, Gainwell as having his own role in that offense, and Boston Scott being Miles Sanders' direct backup. And then last guy, I feel like we have to talk about him, is Jonathan Taylorman. He's playing the freaking Titans. It's a bad defense. I mean, Jonathan Taylor had scored 22 DK points over at least over the last four weeks. I mean, he's gotten 22, 31, 34, and 23. He's done it on a decent amount of limited work, but it does appear, I know if anyone's out there playing or rostering Naheem Hines, it's pretty much dead at this point. But Jonathan Taylor, man, the touches aren't necessarily great. We did see 18 rushes last week with 3 targets, but he is that guy that can just bust a long play, and he's playing a pretty bad defense. So, I mean, it's 7,200. I feel like we at least have to talk about Jonathan Taylor as a guy that there's some interest in at that price with that kind of floor over the last 4 weeks.
Yeah, and I think if everyone wants to be on Swift, like each year is projecting Swift ownership around 20%, and Jonathan Taylor at like 14. So you have some leverage there for pretty much a similar price range, similar expected points. And Jonathan Taylor, I mean, when was the last time we had a Naheem Hines watch?
Yeah,
seriously. It seems like they
know
I guess game script wise, they've been having the last 2 games. They've had a little easier matchups, and this game's arguably an easy matchup too. But the last few games, they've had the lead, and he has 5 touchdowns in the last 4 games. Rushing, he also has that long 70-yard first play of the game that he had against the Ravens. That you could argue that Swift did something similar last week, and that's why people are on him. Like, if you take out Swift's long touchdown, the first play of the game, last week, then he only has 16 fantasy points. So that's kind of like I think that might be an interesting decision this week between those two, where you're going to go, because Jonathan Taylor probably has the higher upside of touches.
Mm-hmm.
But Swift, obviously, with having a higher upside of catches that he can make up for if Jonathan Taylor doesn't hit the 100-yard bonus or gets a touchdown.
Pool of 5 running backs, week 8.
We can go with Henderson, Swift, Mixon, Carter, and Damian Harris.
Love it, man. Moving over to the wide receivers. I guess like before we move over to wide receivers, I think we didn't talk about Derrick Henry. And it seems like we're both fading him because we didn't talk about him. Just wanted to touch on it real quick. Is there a reason why we didn't talk? Like, what is your reason to not bringing him up? I got one myself, but I wanted to hear it.
A little tougher matchup. He hasn't been as efficient as a run. It's so weird to say, but he hasn't been as efficient as a runner. I know he's already almost at 100 or 1,000 yards on the season, but he also is almost at 200 carries. So His average yards per carry have actually been down this year, and he's just getting there on volume. And at some point, we're going to keep seeing weeks like last week where for 9,200 he was last week. He only had 16 points, which just isn't enough at that price. So he's at the point now where he's getting a lot more ownership because people are chasing those 3 touchdown, 100+ yard games. So his upside is clearly there, but I think the downside risk when you're paying that much in salary, I'm sure we're going to come to it now, but like Cooper Kupp just seems way more safe of a play.
Let's start there then. Wide receivers, Cooper Kupp, man. Thoughts?
I'd like to get Cooper Kupp in. It's tough this week. This is where someone like Michael Carter becomes a lot more interesting because there's not a ton of cheap options to fit Kupp. And I don't know. I think I kind of talked about it last week too, but it's tough. He's a 9K wide receiver, but he's facing the worst team in the league. And he's getting 30% of 30% of the target share. He's getting so many games with multiple touchdowns, 100 yards with ease. He has at least 10 targets every game, even in games that they're winning by a lot. And it just seems they're trying to go through him, and he's getting a lot of long receptions. He has at least a 30-yard reception in the last 4 games. He only has 1 game this year without a 30+ yard reception. So he's getting targeted down the field. Matthew Stafford loves the fact that he could throw to Cooper Kupp every week. And even in games against like the Lions last week, he had 10 receptions in a game that they should have, smashed the Lions. So I think people might get too fancy and think, oh, they're just going to destroy the Texans. But this team is expected based on just odds, 31 real life points, and that's 4 touchdowns. So, I mean, are you expecting Daryl Henderson to get all 4 of those touchdowns?
No,
I don't know.
No,
So
I'm not. I mean, I don't know if I can fit Kupp, but at the same time, like not
tough.
playing Kupp has burned me more time. I mean, like I have not made a profit the last 2 weeks, and I've not played Kupp the last 2 weeks. So like, for me to say, hey, don't play Cooper Kupp, I feel like I'm not in a position to say that. So I mean, if I can fit Kupp, I'm going to do it. I haven't finished with my lineup construction this week, but Kupp is just like, he's that guy that's like Devontae Adams in the years past. It's been like Michael Thomas like 2-3 years ago, where it's like you just play him every single week and see what else you can fit, because it's just an absolute lock for 25-30 points. Like it's ridiculous.
And you can argue that it's safer to play a high-end wide receiver than a high-end running back, because running back, there's so much more, their point total is so much more dependent on touchdowns than wide receivers, unless someone like, well, we didn't really talk about Kamara, but someone who can get like a bunch of receptions as a running back. So that's where I lean Kupp over Henry, for just the fact that Henry needs to really rack up a bunch of yards and get touchdowns. And last week, if Henry didn't throw a touchdown, then he would have had 11 points or something. Mm-hmm. So yeah, I like Kupp. It's hard to it's hard to fit him in. That's where playing someone like a Michael Carter or some of these cheap wide receivers would work. Kind of going off of that point, like you do Van Jefferson, who's on the same team as Kupp, for $5,000 cheaper, and you're still getting exposure to that 31 point total. But Van Jefferson is not as sexy as a play. He's probably only going to get you like 3-4 catches for like 40 yards. Maybe he gets a touchdown. But I like Kupp, especially since the upper end options, like we don't have a Tyreek Hill who could break the slate. We don't have a Devontae Adams who could break the slate. Like the higher end wide receivers,
the slate breakers are pretty much
Diggs,
gone. I mean, Diggs could do it, but he hasn't.
Play. Yeah, like he's not breaking slates this year, and in a game where they're favored by 2 touchdowns, he might not be needed to do much. And then it's like Mike Williams who could, I guess, but that's the other side. It's like these other guys around there don't really have the same upside that Kupp has.
Yep. And then 2 other wide receivers I expect to be decently highly owned that I have some pretty serious interest in, and good matchups. I mean, let's just make it 3 guys, and then I'll turn it over to you. Same range. Kelvin Ridley, going back to him, I know it might hurt you, but at 6,600, Again, we know what he's capable of. Chris Godwin, 6,400, no AB. We expect Marshawn Lattimore, who has pretty much just locked up Evans the last, say, I don't know, 4 or 5 times they've met. And then finally, AJ Brown, 6,900, no Julio in a matchup against the Colts defense. We're not playing Henry. So, I mean, that's basically us saying that, if we expect the Titans to score through the air for the most point. So those are the 3 guys that I'm looking at, similar range. AJ Brown, 69, Kelvin Ridley, 66, and Godwin, 64. Your thoughts on those 3 and who you're most interested in?
I think Godwin, just because, he was high on my list last week too. But Godwin, he just is a volume play as well, and they love throwing the ball. Brady's just having an incredible year. It seems like they're going for records for Brady left and right. They're just going to keep throwing the ball. And did you hear the quote from Brady after the 600 touchdown?
No, what did he say?
So Evans gave the ball away. They had to get it back. And Brady's like, if he's just going to keep giving the ball to him, I'm not going to throw him another touchdown all year. So, I mean, if you want to go off of that narrative and think that he was serious about it, then, I mean, Godwin's just going to get all of the work. But yeah, I mean, it's the type of thing where in these situations, I talk about it a lot, where I'm just going to play the cheaper of the 2. And Evans is $600 more. So that makes it so easy to me. And Evans last week had 3 touchdowns, which is really funny. Evans had 3 touchdowns and only outscored Godwin by 3 fantasy points.
Not
Godwin
surprised.
only had 1 touchdown. So Godwin is more the type of guy who can get you double digit. He's going to get you double digit targets. And in this game against the Saints, like you said, the Saints have been the nemesis to Evans pretty much his whole career.
For sure. And Marshawn Lattimore pretty much owns it, man.
So, I really like Godwin. Who are the other ones that you were saying?
It was Ridley. Thoughts on Ridley, 66.
Yeah, so Ridley, I still got the bad taste in my mouth from last week.
Fair.
But it's pretty much the same play this week. And if people are going to be off of him because of what happened last week, that's just more of the reason to play him. I still think he is relatively underpriced because we know what his upside is. But now that Pitts is there and getting a lot of this work now, I think that somewhat limits Ridley's upside, because in the past it really came from, Julio doesn't get touchdowns. They don't really throw to the tight end, and Ridley's the guy that's getting touchdowns. So now that they have Pitts, who's that big body, and it seems like Ryan's comfortable throwing too around the end zone, then maybe Ridley is no longer a 7,500 wide receiver, and 6,600 is just the correct price for him instead of him being undervalued. I still think he'll get a decent amount of ownership. He's projected pretty well.
He's been getting the volume. The volume has been there.
Yeah, I prefer Godwin over him, but if you can get them both in a lineup, that's good. Do you prefer AJ Brown over Ridley? Because I think
yes,
I might.
I do. I prefer AJ Brown over Ridley. I think it really comes. I know Julio hasn't done a ton, but I think the way that I look at this is the Colts run defense is the best, first DVOA run defense in the NFL, right? And we've already kind of taken a stand where we're not playing Henry, and we're not also sitting here saying that the Titans aren't going to score points, right? So if we're not playing Henry, which is fair, I mean, he could still score 70 yards on a touchdown, and we not playing him, we're fine. But they're going to score probably at least 2 or 3 touchdowns in this game, and what other options are catching those? I mean, is another Pruitt week where he keeps scoring touchdowns? I mean, it's just, if I'm not playing Henry and Julio's out, and the Colts run defense is tough, it almost seems like I'm saying indirectly that AJ Brown's going to have a good week. I mean, he's back. He's back from the injury. Things have been looking good, especially the last 2 weeks. I think he was sick or something there for a bit. That was part of the reason he wasn't playing.
The Chipotle flu.
Yeah, yeah, but it's he's back-to-back 9 targets, right? His first big game, he had 7 catches, 91 yards, and then he, lit the Chiefs on fire for 8 catches, 133 yards, and a touchdown, man. So I'm all about AJ Brown this week. I'd play him comfortably over Ridley, even just 300 more.
Yeah, and I think when it comes down to it, there's really guys in that range, and some people that I think might get overlooked because they're more expensive, paying up to be contrarian idea, I think Deebo Samuel is likely overpriced, but that'll keep his ownership down. And he's facing the Bears, who have just been getting pretty ripped apart by opposing wide receivers. And he has the upside of 8 catches, 100 yards, touchdown games. We've seen it a couple times this year where he's got over 35 fantasy points. So with his upside, I'm interested in playing potentially a lineup or two that has Debo as like a one-off in there.
Ooh, like it. It's
Because
a little
I don't
expensive for
think
me, but
people
yeah.
are gonna. I think people will go to a DJ Moore first, but Debo's like the guy.
Okay. Other, let's throw a couple, maybe some cheaper options that we're looking at. I mean, there's one guy that's like sticking out to me, obviously, and I think the game script doesn't make it as nice of a play, but it's going to be T. Higgins, 5,200. I mean, 15 targets last week. I mean, Jesus Christ. But I mean, he saw 15 targets last week, 6, 7, 10 the week before that. I mean, in week 2, he was out for injury there a bit, but since he's been back, I mean, it's this offense has really. It's really Jamar Chase. Yeah, it's really. I mean, like Boyd is like not really usable anymore. I mean, I think he's good if one of these guys is out, but I mean, it's really Higgins and Chase. So I mean, at 5,200, with he's not going to see 15 targets again, but I feel pretty safe saying T. Higgins will see 7 or 8 targets here. So Higgins at 5,200 is giving me some interest.
Yeah, I think he's going to be one of the most commonly played players on the entire slate, just because he's pretty heavily underpriced for his role. And I think if he wasn't injured for a few weeks there, then he'd be at least 6K at this point. So that's kept him down. The one thing with Higgins, and I think you could easily come off of him on tournaments, is he doesn't really have the touchdown upside. Like his floor is there. It's definitely there. Can't deny it. But Chase seems to be the guy around the end zone that they want to throw to, or they'll run it with Mixon. So I think that limits him to, say, outperform that big ownership in GPPs. So I'd be off of Higgins and GPPs, but I'm likely playing him in cash because we don't have many good options in that range. We talked about it a little bit before we hopped on here, where pretty much all the wide receivers under 5K look the same to me. They're guys you're playing for volume. You're trying to get them to catch them on a 6 to 8 reception week. You have your Crowders, your LaVisca, Mooney, like those are the types of guys in that range. So I think to come off of Higgins, maybe my favorite play would be Michael Pittman, or I could go with like a Callaway. Because I don't think Callaway is going to get much ownership. I think people would go to Pittman. What do you think on Pittman, though? Because his upside seems relatively limited as well, but he's pretty much carved out a pretty solid role in that offense, and the Titans' defense have been had a lot of holes.
Yeah, I mean, Pittman's a tough one for me because I go back and forth as him as like a prospect or a guy that I like in fantasy. So, I mean, last week's great. Touchdown, 105 yards. We did it in 4 targets, like in 4 catches. Like the volume wasn't there. And I think that I had some concern when, T.Y. Hilton, this 32-year-old self, hobbles back from injury and out targets Pittman. I don't know. I'm back at 5,300 though. No problem with it. Am I playing him? No. If you want to play him, fine. But at the end of the day, it's like the volume hasn't necessarily been there for me to love it. But you could talk me into it. I mean, I think with Higgins there at 52, I'd rather play Higgins than Pittman. But I think it's a fine, pivot if you wanted to go to Pittman instead of Higgins. But I'm leaning the Higgins side.
Yeah, I think Higgins is likely to play, at least for cash. I'm just thinking if Pittman is even that great of a pivot off of him or not, or if he's just basically the same play.
He's less. I mean, less volume.
Well, that's why I think maybe I would go to Callaway, or like up to a Devonta Smith. Like Callaway, I think has the upside with touchdowns and his breakaway speed. That since Jameis is going to be full of revenge in this game, that Callaway is probably the one that I would end up going with.
Fair enough. Any another wide receiver you want to talk about out there?
Corey Davis is out, so I kind of have interest in Jamison Crowder 4,800.
Yeah, don't have to talk me into it.
It's not sexy, but I would rather do him than Mooney or even Robbie Anderson that I think people will go back to, or LaVisca. The issue is we know pretty much nothing about this Mike White guy, but Jamison Crowder is going to have probably 8 to 10 targets in this game. And I mean, we've seen him have touchdowns in the past, and they're likely going to be trailing. And a mini stack of Higgins and Crowder, two guys that you're paying 10K for, like that opens up a decent amount of salary in your lineup. So I kind of like those two, playing them together. But I mean, it's playing a Jet in cash. We've already talked about two of them. Like I can't play him
Carter
and Carter.
No, you can't, man. All right,
what did you say their expected total 16?
Yeah, it's like you gotta pick one of them, man.
So gross.
Unless you're saying they're scoring both
or
touchdowns.
None. I mean, gross.
I'm with you, man. I'm 100% with you. All right, sake of time here, I'm asking for your pool of 5 wide receivers, and if there is a fifth we haven't talked about, just give me a little more.
I'll throw Kupp in there. I think Diggs is probably going to get some decent ownership as well, but I like Kupp. And then I'll say AJ Brown, Ridley, Higgins and cash, Crowder, and Godwin. Yeah. Yep. I played. So last week, I think I talked about this on the pod where I was leaving Henderson in flex spots. And since what happened in the first round of games and I was kind of catching up, I switched him to Evans in a bunch of spots, which I mean, turned out pretty good. He outscored Henderson.
Great. That was great, man.
And I knew people were going to be on Godwin a lot. So I think for this
probably save you some cash there, man.
Yeah. And I think for this week, it could be something similar that if I can switch off Godwin up to Evans, I'd probably end up doing that. Or, I mean, Keenan Allen is kind of gross, but DK Metcalf, 6,800.
No, I can't do it, man. No. I mean, he had that nice. I mean, he's good, obviously.
He has the upside, but
it's just Geno Smith, man. It's just disgusting.
Yeah,
it's just I'm not playing Seattle players at all. I'm sorry, it's just not there for him.
That's fair.
Tight ends. You know me, man. This is going to be my 4th week in a row, likely playing Ricky Seals-Jones. I mean, his price has pretty much stayed similar, even though he's an absolute full-time tight end. I mean, there's no one switching. He's not in a platoon. He is the tight end on the Washington football team. I mean, he has 3x to salary every single week since he became a full-time starter in week 5. So it's just he's 3,800. Like I can't believe he's not I can't believe he's not. He should have been 4,500 last week. He probably should have been 4,500 this week. So to see him at 38K again. He's just a lock to 3x that price at this point. I mean, I might have just jinxed his ass, but at the same time, like at 38K with a team like the Washington football team, the Broncos full-time role. The Broncos are a bit of a fraud. I mean, the last 3 weeks he saw 9, 6, and 7 targets. Only seen 1 touchdown. Could easily see another. So I mean, I'm here for RSJ. I'm continuing to play RSJ if I can fit him in, man.
Yeah, and that just reminded me kind of what I was just saying, but Cortland Sutton's actually kind of interesting this week too, 6,400 on the other side of that game. So I think having like a little mini stack of RSJ with Sutton is kind of nice.
Yeah. Because Judy comes back, everyone's gonna. I mean, Judy's cheap too, so everyone's. I mean, if Judy plays,
they're more likely to go there.
Yep.
But I mean, Ricky Seals-Jones is just for 3,800 is pretty safe. It's similar to the Logan Thomas last year where. I mean, it's not the sexiest play. Yeah. Like he doesn't have crazy upside, but you don't necessarily need upside for tight ends. You don't need multiple touchdowns.
Just don't have
not for him. Are people going to get fancy and play Uzoma after last week and the last few weeks?
I hope they do. I hope the people I'm playing play Uzoma. That's for sure.
So that's where like it's going to be like him against Uzoma or Freiermuth. I'm hearing some talk about more recently.
Yes, I'm here for Freiermuth.
7 catches last week. Ebron's out.
Juju's out. I mean, that's part of the reason. And then Ebron's out.
They have some injuries on it. And so Freiermuth is getting some talk as well. So it's funny, like that upper 3K range for tight ends is juicy this week. And I'm not really interested much in the 4 to 5K guys. I guess Higbee's 4,500 isn't terrible. He's got a pretty good matchup. And I mean, the Texans have just been getting shredded by tight ends as well. Gesicki, I think, might be too high of a price now for me to play, even though he has been crushing it each week. He's just getting the targets. But like you said earlier, like I'd play him in 2 lineups, but not one off because I want to capture it with the Tua upside.
Mm-hmm.
Hawkinson, I think, is going to end up being under-owned and somewhat forgotten about in this matchup. But as I mentioned earlier, I kind of like Lions to win this game. And with that, I think Hawkinson would do well. Probably won't get all the way up to Pitts, though.
Nope.
He's expensive. And then the other guy that's getting a ton of talk is Dan Arnold, who it's
2,800.
not a sexy play at all. It's Jaguars. It's 2,800 though. So yeah, you're just saving a ton of salary. I just don't know if the upside's really there. Like he's been talked up as being a prospect for being a good catching tight end, but he's hasn't really done it yet. He hasn't proven that is the case. And I really like those other guys in the upper 3K a little more. I don't know. Is there any other guys in there that I missed, or you think strongly in the opposite way?
No, I'm playing RSJ, and if I don't play RSJ, I'd play Freiermuth. I mean Higbee's nice, but I the way I'm building my team with my running backs and my wide receivers, all those guys like sitting in the 5, 6, some maybe 7K range. I don't really have an option to go into the 4K range at tight end, so it's RSJ for me, and I would have no issues if you wanted to pivot to Freiermuth just to get a little bit different.
Yeah.
Pool of 3 tight ends, Lou.
I'll go with Hawkinson, RSJ, and Freiermuth.
Love it, dude. Absolutely love it. All right, let's just, coming up in the hour here, let's just close it out with defense, special teams. I mean, the one that popped out to me is just going to be Washington football team, 2,100. Yes, they haven't been good this year, but they've looked better. I think you mentioned before the show they've been getting a little more sacks as of late, and I think the Broncos aren't good. So at 2,100, like, when if you're to say, hey, Tyler, how much is the Washington football team this week? I would have guessed it would have been like 26, 27. So at 2,100, it fits the lineup really well. It's just easy to click. It is also one of those games where I don't necessarily expect there to be a lot of points. I think Vegas has this game at 44.5. So I'm here for just locking in Washington football team at 21, getting a little bit of a sack floor, which I think exists more than we think. Because let's see. Yeah, you're right, man. I mean, they started off, they've had 3-3-2 the last 3 weeks in terms of sacks. So not so bad. They've had 3 interceptions over the last 3 weeks. They've had 8 sacks over the last 3 weeks. So pretty easy for me. Anyone else interested in?
Yeah, I was surprised that they weren't like 2,500. I think their price specifically is going to just increase their ownership. People like playing the cheap defense.
I wouldn't be surprised if it's like, I don't know if it'll be like necessarily like the Cardinals.
They had ETR has them at 17%, which is
so that's probably the highest. Yeah, that's
their highest. I think, as gross as it is to say, Jaguars defense against Geno Smith at 2,400 is a decent, like another cheap defense that you could go with.
Yep, absolutely.
Other side of the ball, Seahawks, maybe they're at 2,800. So
that game could be
that game's going to be a slugfest. That you could easily see both of them just being the cheap options people like to go do. Lions 2,300. I don't know. I just keep liking the Lions.
I mean, that's the thing. It's like they haven't been.
They
really
have to win at some
out.
point, right?
And they also haven't been necessarily blown out in most of their games this year.
In a way, they have looked better than the Eagles for being similarly bad.
7, yeah.
I agree. And then I think if I were to say like pay up, Bills 3,300 or like a pay up option, but I don't know. For the most part, I'm gonna look at those cheaper teams.
All right, Lou. Final thoughts. Week 8 before we get out of here.
I think it's an interesting slate because there's a lot of those big name teams. Like we don't have the Ravens, the Chiefs, the Packers had already played. Like a lot of these big name teams.
No Cowboys or Vikings.
Oh, it's Cardinals too. So like a lot of the high end scoring guys are off this slate, which makes for some interesting teams. And there's four late games this week, so less than last week, but the late slate games are also pretty juicy, I'd say. So I'm excited for it and excited to see some crazy outfits for Halloween on Sunday watching Red Zone because that's always fun.
All right. That's going to do it. Daily Destroyer Week 8 main slate preview on DraftKings. Make sure you follow Lou on Twitter at LouDogSports. Follow me on Twitter at FFTylerO. That's all we have today, folks. Don't forget, tell somebody you love them.